Good evening and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Adam Jasser. European leaders are trying to put a brave face on after Donald Trump's election victory. In reality, many of them are concerned about America walking away from Europe and allowing Russia to defeat Ukraine. For months, Europeans were contemplating a possible Trump victory, and yet today they still lack a coherent strategy to take care of their own economic and military security.
Although EU leaders have showered President-elect Donald Trump with congratulatory tweets, the real test of transatlantic relations is yet to come and will hinge on how Trump approaches a number of issues, most importantly Ukraine and Europe's security.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly.
A number of analysts have pointed to Trump's ambiguous statements on Ukraine as an indication that his administration would cut military aid and force Kyiv to concede territory in return for peace. President Volodymyr Zelensky kept a brave face on, saying he believes in Trump's assertions that peace can be achieved only through strength.
Trump likes to make deals. He likes to put pressure on the person he's speaking to get a better deal. It is possible that, not certain, but possible, that Trump will seek to end the conflict, but not necessarily and hopefully not on Putin's terms.
Defense spending among NATO members is another variable influencing transatlantic relations. European allies hope that upping their contributions to NATO coffers will placate Trump and convince him to keep America involved in the alliance.
When President-elect Trump takes office again on January 20th, he will be welcomed by a stronger, larger, and more united alliance. Two-thirds of allies now spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, and defense spending and production are on onward trajectory across the alliance.
Trade relations are also likely to be revised, especially given Trump's intent to introduce tariffs of up to 20% on all non-domestic goods sold in America, but also a 60% tariff on goods from China.
The word tariff is the most beautiful in the dictionary.
I'm going to impose a tariff on the outside world, and they're going to pay it.
Another bone of contention is likely going to be climate policies. Trump focuses on energy independence and wants to expand American drilling regardless of the potential environmental impact. Europe is taking a different course.
There's also a very broad consensus across much of Europe that we need to do more to decarbonize the electricity system in particular. And there's an open question about what's going to happen in the US with Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, a strangely named act which was really about trying to promote green activity in the United States.
The clock for Europeans to come up with a strategy to deal with Trump is ticking. They have until January 20th, when he will be sworn in as the 47th US president.
Will Trump's second term jolt Europeans into action, or is it going to deepen divisions inside the Union? To discuss this, I'm joined today by Constanze Stelzenmüller, head of the Center on the US and Europe at the Brookings Institution, and Michał Kobosko, member of the European Parliament from Poland and the former head of the Warsaw Bureau of the Atlantic Council. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
If I may start with you, Constanze, let me ask you first, if you peel away some of the campaign rhetoric, what can we surmise about Trump's likely approach to Europe and Ukraine?
Well, first off, good morning, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It's always sort of suboptimal to be hovering on a large screen in the background and in people's backs, and I apologize for that. As for I would take the campaign rhetoric very seriously if I were you. It has always been right to take Trump seriously and literally. So I would use that as a checklist, frankly. And the fact that he now has not just the presidency, but the majority in the Senate and very likely the House, and of course can spend 4 more years nominating Supreme Court justices, means that he has not just a trifecta, but a quadrifecta. It also looks as though he was set to have the majority of the popular vote. That de facto means, right, that he owns all the problems that he has ascribed to the Biden presidency, and that expectations of him, of his ability to address them all in the way that he has promised, will be very, very high.
Okay, so let me ask you here. You know, he said he wants peace through strength, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was trying to make the best of it, saying, well, I agree with you, let's do it together. You think this is empty rhetoric?
I didn't say that. I've said the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I said you should take it seriously.
So what does it mean for Ukraine then?
Look, let me start over. Mm-hmm. I think Trump should be believed when he says, I will do X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. And the people who voted for him will expect him to do that. The question is, can he do it? Does he have the people to execute? And do they have the competence to execute? In the first administration, that turned out to be a real problem. We have been told by his advisors and the people who speak for him that it will be very different this time and that they are extremely well prepared. So for now, I would, if I were in Kyiv or in Berlin or in Warsaw, say, well, tell us exactly how you're going to do this. I personally still have doubts because from where I sit in Washington, D.C., I see many inconsistencies in the Trump camp's positions. And I think given this sort of extremely impressive majority that they got, these might now come to the fore and play out, not least in the form of personal rivalries between the people who want the top jobs.
Right.
So we shall see.
Okay, so is the word inconsistency and potentially chaos the right words to describe what's coming for the world and Europe?
Possibly.
I didn't say chaos.
Well,
no, I'm saying chaos. It was my addition. Because some analysts are actually talking about chaos. But let Mr. Kobosko now comment on this.
Well, I'm not expecting a chaos because we already have, I would say, significant levels of chaos worldwide in many regional conflicts and even some more global conflicts or international conflicts. But so not chaos, but uncertainty, and a huge level and a very high level of uncertainty, adding to the uncertainty which we had until now. So that's the problem with Trump. I do understand what we just heard, that, and I agree with that we should expect, and the voters mainly of Trump are expecting him to deliver, that he will do exactly what he promised. The problem is that from our European perspective, that would be very problematic. That would bring new challenges to our transatlantic relations. That would even deepen challenges and the troubles we have in transatlantic relations and in our relations inside the European Union. That's the issue which is on the table. A lot of new uncertainty, starting not on January 20, actually starting already now. You mentioned the Ukraine. This is the key issue from our perspective. Obviously, we should be afraid that he would really want to materialize what he said. Ending war in one day or with one phone call. We know it's not the reality. It's not going to happen. It's just that the pressure on Ukrainians, on President Zelensky, might be used by President Trump and his administration, pushing them to adopt or accept the peace on unacceptable terms, peace with Russia.
Yes, this question of inconsistency inside of his inner circle on Ukraine is visible in some of the pronouncements. We hear some people saying, oh, you know, Trump is going to really help Ukraine, supply it with arms, but will force it into some kind of a peace negotiation, and so on and so forth. Others are saying we should stop financing Ukraine straight away. So I guess we need to wait and see. But on the other hand, Ian Brzezinski, who is a former US diplomat and a leading foreign policy analyst in the US, told us that he feared Europe could overreact to the result of the vote. And he encouraged Europeans to pursue accommodation and discussion and keep their nerve. Constance, what's your view on this?
I think keeping our nerves is never a bad recommendation under these circumstances, frankly. It is what I'm trying to do myself. But look, I think that we are, of course, steering towards a very, very disruptive period, right? Again, I want to repeat that I think the views and the goals of the Trump himself and the people who support him, the people who look to receive important political positions in his administrations are not completely consistent, and there will be conflict about this. And finally, the man himself is known to be famously disruptive and impulsive, and inclined to follow those impulses regardless of who tries to discipline. And this became very visible during his campaign. So, but that if you turn that around, it becomes all the more important, as your other guest just said, that we have a very clear idea of what we want, and that we pursue what we ought to have been doing for the past decade at least, which is strengthening Europe's security, but not just security, it's political cohesion, right? My biggest concern, frankly, is that European capitals are going to do what they did last time, which is to say, all this, political consensus brokering in Brussels is much too difficult. Let's run to Washington and make offers in the hopes that we will then be loved and appreciated. That didn't go very well for most people. And what I'm most concerned about, really, is the ability of Europe's leaders to stand together. And which is not to say they shouldn't be spending more on defense, they should.
Right, so in other words, you're afraid of European leaders just running to Washington, doing bilateral deals. What could be the consequences for our region, for Poland, for Central Europe, of such an approach? Because obviously there are bigger countries in Europe than our corner of the woods. So what does it mean for Poland?
Well, obviously running into bilateral talks is actually what Trump wants and what he sees as the only way of communicating and cooperating with other partners. He doesn't treat EU very seriously. He did not treat NATO for some years already, not entirely seriously. So he would love to have this kind of relations and bilateral relations, and definitely he will have. Some among the European Union leaders are more than happy, including Orban, including Fico, perhaps the Meloni, and other leaders will be more than happy to be invited to the White House and start talking to him. But again, that would be extremely dangerous for us as Europe as a whole, as European Union. European Union basically was pretty seriously treated by Biden administration. That was unprecedented before. So it was good that we saw Ursula von der Leyen as a partner to President Biden. I'm afraid that's not going to happen with President Trump. And coming to our region, that sounds increasingly dangerous for all of us, because we have a real full-scale war next door from us, from Poland, Central and Eastern Europe. If Trump was about to decide to stop the war, that would mean to let the Ukrainians lose the war. And Ukrainians losing the war or agreeing to transform it into a frozen conflict, that's just giving and buying time for Putin to rearm, to reinforce, and to get back to the military way, which he chose. So that's the real issue, that with the Trump administration saying to Ukrainians, we will stop supporting you, that would mean stop defending Europe, and specifically us, our region.
But on the other hand, we had Georgette Mosbacher, the former Trump ambassador to Warsaw, giving an interview to the Polish press agency, and she said, Poland has nothing to fear. Trump has had an excellent relationship with Poland, he cares deeply about Poland, and you're safe, in a nutshell. You're not reassured?
Well, I do not feel safe, I must say, when I look at what's happening for more than 2.5 years in Ukraine, which is very, very near from here. I don't feel safe also because I know how it worked during the first Trump administration, his first term, that Poland was among the best clients, if you like. He's a business person. He's never avoiding to say that, to underline that. And he, as a business person, he loved Poland as a best client, a country which was buying a lot of American military equipment, natural gas, or signing a contract to build a nuclear power plant in Poland with the American partners. So once we are again be the buyers, the clients for administration, yes, he will keep loving us. But I'm afraid also because of our budgetary issues and challenges in Poland, that's not going to be the fact during the second term of Trump.
Right. Constanze, let me ask you this question, because we mentioned NATO. You know, when NATO was created after World War II, Lord Ismay, the first Secretary General, famously remarked that the purpose of the alliance was to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and Germany down. Are we going into a reverse pattern now?
Well, you know, countless jokes have been made in 70 years, 75 years, about that quote, and I'm not going to add to them. I think that regardless of who was going to win the American election, right, it was always going to be necessary for Europeans to pull together in NATO and take on a much larger share of the burden. And it was always, since you have me with you as a German guest, it was always going to be necessary for Germany, with as one of the largest, if not the largest economy in Europe, despite its current economic and other problems, to do more than others, right? And I think that has just become even more obvious than it already was. And one of the reasons, by the way, why the German government just collapsed was because the chancellor said that the finance minister would not let him circumvent the debt brake in what is obviously a financial emergency situation that requires larger military spending. And so, which is something that the finance minister very bluntly refused to do. So I think that I think for Georgette Mosmacher to say Poland is not the problem here is an implicit comment on Germany. As we know very well, Trump himself and many of his key advisors think that Germany is the problem. And honestly, I think that anybody who sort of knows what I've written, will know that I agree with some of that.
So he's got a point, right? But can you tell us...
If not for the same reasons. But yes, of course.
I understand, but at the end of the day, Germany is, you could argue, is failing its European NATO partners or even EU partners. So, and now we have this government crisis in Germany, so, and potentially a new election very soon. Is that going to change the picture in any way?
I think so. And if I may, as a German, say I would refrain from indulging in generalizations such as saying Germany is failing, right? I do think that the Zeitenwende that Scholz called out is meant very seriously, that he considers himself a transatlanticist and a Europeanist, and that he has grave fears of what Russia wants to do, not just to Ukraine, but also in Europe. I disagree with him on the pace and on the fear of escalation, on the pace of the support, and the scale of support. It is well known that the Greens have a much more robust idea of, or much more robust wishes for supporting Ukraine. And I think the same is true of the leader of the opposition, Friedrich Merz, who has in fact suggested that should Russia continue to bombard Ukraine as brutally as he does now, we should start giving them Tauruses, which I strongly agree with. And I think that if there are early elections, whether they are only in whether we have a vote of confidence in January, as Scholz wants right now, or earlier, it's, I think, very clear that Merz will be the next Chancellor of Germany, and I don't see him forming a coalition without the Greens. I don't think that that's politically available to him. So yes, there will be a strong faction there in favor of a robust German military posture, and of course, I want this to be very clear to your viewers, right? That for, I think, the very large majority of Germans, including in my generation and me personally, the friendship and the partnership with Poland is absolutely crucial to our own security posture and to our political future.
Well, our generation probably understands that pretty well, but, we have in Germany the rise of the far right, we have the AfD, and the question is whether the future federal government in Germany will consist of the CDU.
No, it will never consist of the AfD, I can tell you that. The CDU has been very clear on that. There are sort of breaches of the firewall on the local level where it is impossible to govern otherwise. But on the national level, the AfD is toxic and is inching closer and closer to a, constitutional procedure of what we call Parteiverbot, delegitimization. The larger problem is the extreme left party, the alliance of Sarah Wagenknecht, who I think are most precisely referred to or described as national Bolshevists, and who are currently trying to shoot up the Christian Democrats in coalition negotiations in eastern states. But they're also overshooting the mark. They have now made 2 out of 3 coalition negotiations fail, and that does not reflect well on them. And I think they're also caught wrong. They're being wrong-footed by the early election date. So, I apologize for the great confusion in my country, but I can assure you that there is a very large majority that thinks of the AfD and of BSW as dangerous to German democracy and to our, what we call Westbindung, our connection with the West, and our alliances with our neighbors.
So at the end of the day, if it takes a grand coalition of the CDU and SPD to stop this, that's what's going to happen.
Yes, but presumably it would not involve Olaf Scholz. I could quite likely see it as involving Boris Pistorius, who, as you know, also has quite robust...
The defense minister.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are you reassured?
If you don't mind, I have to run to a meeting, and
Right.
I'm going to have to leave you. I am terribly sorry to do this to you.
No, it's all right. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your insight with us, and if you allow us, we'll continue the conversation here.
Of course, and it's been a pleasure. Forgive me.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
So, do you feel reassured by this, that Germany will come around and become more coherent in its policy and give Europe some direction?
Look, I would say that the real danger that we had linked to the US elections was that we would not have a clear verdict anytime soon, because we were afraid that this might take long days, if not weeks, before we know the final results of US. That did not materialize, and that's a good thing. And I would say the same applies to Germany as well, because I do understand that the government collapsed. What I do not understand is that Chancellor Scholz wants to prolong the life of this government, which collapsed, until somewhere in March. That's here I do understand the leaders of the CDU, Mr. Merz and others, saying that it's too far from here, that they should vote in the Bundestag on the current government anytime soon, and then they should have elections already either in December or January. And I believe that would be a right thing to do, because having so much of the uncertainty in Washington, D.C., we want to see some clear answers in Europe. We need to be ready to sit down with the administration of Trump and start talking with them, not just waiting to see, like Ian Brzezinski said, that Europe might overreact. We want to see the actions, the first decisions of the Trump administration, and we hope it's not going to be very brutal against Europe.
So, you are still hopeful that Europe can get its act together at the end of the day?
I do believe so. I believe this is the very high time, and not the last minute, but I would say a really high time for Europe to start not only talking and publishing another Draghi report, Letta report, Niinistö report, but to start acting and deciding about its own future. It is up to us to decide and to implement these decisions into actions.
Mr. Kobosko, thank you very much. This was On the Record. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.